There are times in a person's life when the foundations of logic begin to shake. When the external world fades in significance, and the only illumination left is the one burning inside. But this inner light offers no comfort. It's ancient, primitive, almost volcanic. In the year 1913, Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist, follower of Freud, and one of the foremost figures in modern psychology, walked away from all that granted him esteem. He turned his back on the scientific establishment much like a shipwrecked sailor abandons the safety of land, not from insanity, but out of loyalty to something more profound, the soul. For several years, he immersed himself in what he described as a controlled descent into madness. This wasn't mental illness. It was a deliberate journey into the depths of his inner world, led by images, archetypes, and voices beyond conscious thought. He named this method active imagination, and from this practice came a book that remained hidden until after his passing. A weighty, red leather-bound manuscript, handwritten and filled with illustrations, reminiscent of an ancient alchemical text. Within its pages, there are no psychological theories, only profound insights. The Red Book isn't a clinical manual. It's a spiritual passage. It is, in essence, the soul's own scripture. Carl Gustav Jung, admired as a Swiss psychiatrist, stood at the height of his professional life. He was the director of the Bergallslee Clinic, Freud's chosen heir, and an esteemed speaker. The scientific world praised him, society respected him, and his public persona was impeccable. Yet beneath all that, something began to shift. His dreams began to show unsettling visions. He saw a red ocean engulfing entire cities, blood flowing through deserted streets, collapsing towers, nameless deaths. His rational mind faltered. He jotted down observations. He waited, hoping the visions would fade, but they didn't. The year was 1913, and although the world hadn't realized it yet, the First World War was looming. Jung didn't understand it logically. He sensed it viscerally, with every fiber of his being. He had glimpsed the coming storm before anyone else, but that knowledge came at a steep cost. He described it later as being pulled into the depths by a divine force, invisible and overwhelming. His split from Freud wasn't just a scholarly disagreement. It was symbolic. Jung was discarding the outdated, mechanical view of the human mind. He no longer wished to analyze the soul like a broken machine. He longed to hear it, to follow its guidance, to surrender to it. And that's when the real darkness came. An inner kind of darkness, not mere melancholy, but the classic dark night of the soul, a term borrowed from the mystic street. John of the Cross, now taking on a richer meaning. It wasn't simple despair, it was the disintegration of the ego, a total collapse of self, necessary for something truer to rise. In this profound crisis, Jung found the technique that would transform him, active imagination, a bridge between dreaming and meditation, where he let images surface freely and engaged with them as if in conversation. It was a kind of lucid trance, a conscious hallucination, or as mystics would have said, an act of summoning the soul. He would spend hours in his study, faithfully recording everything he experienced. He wasn't creating fantasies, he was documenting revelations, like a seer transcribing messages from another world. His pen flew across the paper as figures from the depths of his psyche came forth and began to speak. These weren't just abstract symbols, they appeared as actual beings. Elijah, the prophet from the Old Testament. Salome, the dancer from biblical lore. A serpent deity, a laughing demon, a golden child, a disembodied voice. Jung recorded everything he experienced, eventually even illustrating these encounters. The intensity of these visions shook him to his core. He doubted his own sanity, yet something deeper reassured him. This wasn't madness. It was a rite of passage. Those who venture into the depths of darkness often return with a new fire in their gaze. In that crucible, the public figure known as Carl Jung faded away, and in his place emerged a seeker, an alchemist of the soul. He left behind the safety of academic prestige to embark on what ancient mystics called the opus magnum, the great work of the soul. There were no certainties, no accolades, no directions, just an empty journal and the boldness to become lost in search of something far greater. In the midst of this transformation, he wrote, "My life is the story of the self-realization of the unconscious." The Red Book began to take shape from this inner emptiness. Each written page felt like a ritual, every image a vision, each line a sacred act. It would be fair to say Jung underwent a deeply shamanic transformation, a process mirrored in the lives of saints and mystics, the dissolution of the ordinary self to give rise to higher awareness. Perhaps this is why he kept the Red Book private during his lifetime. He knew that the modern world wouldn't be ready. How could a culture built on rationalism accept that his greatest breakthrough came from surrendering control. But the one who seeks initiation understands. They know that before illumination, there is darkness, and that true knowledge is not seized. It is endured. The agonizing cries of the unconscious are, in truth, sacred chants, meant for those attuned enough to hear them. Throughout his inward journey, Jung didn't just stumble upon random visions or symbolic fragments. Amid the whirlwind of images, one central figure began to emerge, steadily and with purpose. This figure was named Philemon, and his presence marked a turning point in Jung's inner evolution. From this moment, his exploration of the psyche turned into a genuine spiritual exchange. Philemon wasn't a figure Jung created deliberately, nor a borrowed mythological character. He came to Jung spontaneously, during one of his sessions of active imagination, his unique method for entering visionary states while remaining consciously aware. In that vision, an old man appeared, cloaked in a blue robe, with kingfisher wings and a flowing white beard. He spoke to Jung, not as a mental projection, but as an independent being. To grasp this properly, it helps to remember that Jung had been deeply immersed in the study of world myths, comparative religions, alchemical imagery, and Eastern spiritual systems. He had been searching for a symbolic language vast enough to describe the human soul. And then, instead of a concept, a living presence appeared, a guide he could question, converse with, and most importantly, learn from. Philemon embodied what Jung would later describe as the archetype of the wise old man, a recurring figure in myths, legends, and spiritual teachings worldwide. In Taoist philosophy, he mirrors the inner Lao. In Christian mysticism, he reflects the divine logos. In the Kabbalah, he corresponds to the hidden elder of the tree of life. He symbolizes a transcendent intelligence, one that leads the individual toward true inner unity. Jung realized that while Philemon wasn't a physical being, he wasn't just a product of imagination either. He referred to him as an autonomous psychic reality, a real force within the psyche that acts like a person, with its own will, knowledge, and purpose, separate from the ego. Philemon felt like a true spirit, Jung wrote. He gave me insights I had never conceived before. I knew he was part of me, but also far beyond me. Philemon was never just a symbolic counselor. For Jung, he became a vital companion on the path he named individuation, the journey through which a person awakens to the totality of their psyche. Not just ego and persona, but the shadow, the animus or anima, and ultimately the self, the wholeness buried beneath the fragmented surface. This is where Philemon's role becomes unmistakable. He serves as the mediator between the ego and the self, the bridge between the conscious mind and the deeper intelligence that lies beneath. This archetype of the inner guide is found in countless esoteric traditions. In Hermeticism, it's Hermes Trismegistus, the revealer of divine mysteries. In alchemy, it's Mercury, the spirit that unifies opposites and enables the great work of transformation. In Jung's own inner cosmology, Philemon fills that same role, not as a rigid doctrine, but as a living, evolving symbol. He embodies the kind of wisdom that only emerges when the rational mind yields to something greater, when silence becomes a portal rather than an absence. So intimate was this relationship that Jung began writing letters to Philemon, actual correspondence addressed to this inner figure. Yet he was rigorous. Jung would not accept fantasies or delusions. He measured every vision by one strict standard: inner truth. He could tell the difference between imagination and an authentic message from the unconscious. And in Philemon, he recognized something undeniable, something other lived within him. But more than a presence, Philemon became a source. Many of the most important ideas in Jungian psychology, archetypes, the collective unconscious, the transcendent function, synchronicity, began to crystallize through these dialogues with Philemon. Jung would later say the Red Book was the primordial wellspring from which all his work emerged. Over the 7 years he poured himself into the Liber Novus, Jung drew Philemon repeatedly. His renderings show a striking figure, eyes deep with knowing, surrounded by symbols like the fish, the serpent, and the six-pointed star, each one a powerful emblem of spiritual metamorphosis. Philemon was not fixed, not frozen. He was a fluid, living archetype, continually evolving as Jung deepened his own integration. He also served as a moral compass. Jung recalled that Philemon would chastise him whenever he began to inflate. When the ego tried to take credit for revelations it did not author, Philemon reminded him, true wisdom does not hunger for fame or control. It seeks only wholeness and authenticity. The danger, Philemon taught, is not in the shadow, but in the man who believes he is only light, a truth more urgent now than ever. And perhaps this is the most powerful insight of all. In an age where so many chase after gurus, systems, saviors, and external truths, Jung, through Philemon, offers us a radical proposition that the truest guide already lives within us. But to hear that guide, one must quiet the ego. One must dare to walk through the shadow. One must let the unconscious speak in its own strange, symbolic tongue. Philemon is not Jung's alone. Anyone who journeys inward with sincerity may encounter a presence like him, perhaps in a different form, a different name, a different voice, but always serving the same purpose, to remind us of who we are beneath the masks we wear. That is the core message. Meeting Philemon was not an escapist fantasy, it was an archetypal initiation, a step in the timeless spiritual process. Jung simply had the courage to document it, without filter, without apology, and leave us a path. The Red Book is not just the diary of a man who spoke with a wise inner figure. It is a map, a blueprint for the psychological and spiritual rebirth that waits for anyone brave enough to enter the silence and embrace the unknown. To the outside world, Carl Jung's plunge into the unconscious might seem like a spiritual quest, and in many ways, it was. But not the kind of spirituality often sold in polished books or radiant slogans. Jung's path was not bathed in light. It began in the dark. True spirituality, he would come to understand, does not start with enlightenment. It begins with decomposition, with the ego's symbolic death, with descent, what alchemists called nigredo, the blackening, the rot necessary before any transformation can begin. And from this descent emerged one of the most vital, yet most misunderstood concepts in Jungian psychology, the shadow. For Jung, the shadow is everything the ego refuses to see in itself. The parts we hide, repress, deny. It holds the rejected pieces, primitive urges, shameful memories, dangerous fantasies, trauma, rage, fear. But paradoxically, it also guards what we've forgotten in our self-censorship, our courage, authenticity, instincts, creativity, and lost vitality. To integrate the shadow is not to conquer evil. It's to welcome back what we've exiled, to become whole, not holy. And this wasn't just theory for Jung. It was lived experience. During the years of the Red Book, Jung did not just glance at the shadow. He entered it. He spoke with it. He recorded his encounters with inner figures that horrified and humbled him. Archetypes of destruction, chaotic visions, madness, cannibalism, and symbolic death. Some of these scenes resemble shamanic initiations or psychedelic visions, but Jung used nothing but active imagination. No drugs, no rituals, just pure descent into the psyche. And what he encountered was not only his personal shadow. He touched the collective shadow, the dark reservoir of all that humanity denies. He said, "Everything that we do not face in ourselves will be presented to us as fate." He described meetings with disturbing inner characters. One tried to tempt him with promises of absolute power. Another dragged him across a lifeless desert, where all meaning dried up. He even wrote of an encounter with the devil, a mocking figure, hollow-eyed, who tested his resolve and illusions. Were these visions tests? Invitations to surrender his inflated self-image? To accept that he, too, was just another flawed, desiring, suffering human? That he would find no peace until he dropped the performance and stopped running? This is the baptism Jung endured, not in light, but in abyss. In a world where even spirituality has become sanitized and commercialized, Jung's journey offers a brutal, necessary counterpoint. There is no real awakening without shadow work, no real healing without honesty. He knew what the alchemists knew. The great work begins not with light, but with decomposition. Nigredo, the black night of the soul. And for Jung, the wound that began this process was twofold. First, the outer wound. He had broken from Freud, lost his status, and stood alone. No longer the celebrated Swiss doctor. He was untethered, drifting. Second, the inner wound. His rational mind, once so confident, so secure, began to dissolve. He felt it breaking apart. So he wrote compulsively, drew disturbing images, cried in solitude, sat in silence for hours on end. He let the structures collapse, but he never lost his method. Jung was not lost in psychosis. He was in initiation. He documented everything. He compared what he saw to ancient myths, to Gnostic scriptures, to alchemical manuscripts, to the Upanishads, to the dreams of his patients. He realized something extraordinary. His private descent mirrored a universal pattern. He was living a myth, the archetype of the descent into the underworld. This myth has many names. The Greeks called it katabasis. The alchemists named it putrefactio. In the tarot, it's Arcana 13, death. It is the moment when the old self dies and nothing yet replaces it. There is no comfort here, no affirmations, only raw, existential silence. No answers, only the void. It brings devastation, a breakdown of the false constructs of the ego. Jung witnessed his inner foundation crumble, piece by piece. The man who once commanded the depths of the mind now found himself wandering without footing. He came to realize that the goal wasn't to conquer the shadow, but to engage it in conversation, to truly hear it, and to accept its presence. He further discovered that the more he turned toward the darkness, the more his awareness expanded. Out of turmoil, a new center begins to form. The shadow is no longer a foe, but a reflection, a teacher, a vital part of becoming whole. Through this transformation, Jung moved closer to something once purely theoretical, the self, the totality of the psyche, uniting the conscious with the unconscious, the visible with the hidden, the mask with the true being. The self isn't something that can be reached through logic or strategy. It's a profound inner event that only unveils itself after one has descended into the depths. When the ego dissolves and something new starts to emerge, this inner rebirth doesn't strike like lightning. It unfolds gradually. It arrives like clarity after chaos, a light that illuminates rather than blinds. Jung began recognizing repeating symbols and internal structures. He started drawing mandalas, sensing that beneath the disorder, a deeper rhythm was present. The soul, he realized, had its own natural cadence, and the shadow wasn't a flaw, it was integral to the journey. This insight later surfaced in one of his most memorable declarations: "Salvation is in the mud." He said, "The pearl is born in the sludge." Jung demonstrated that healing the soul isn't about cleansing it of contradictions, but embracing its fractured nature. It's about reconciling with what is dark, unpleasant, and disowned, and from that tension, creating something authentic. He completed writing the Red Book around 1930, not because his path had concluded, but because he had grasped something crucial. The book wasn't a destination. It was a threshold. He had experienced the ego's disintegration, spoken with the hidden voices of his psyche, met his inner guide, and navigated the shadow's turbulence. On the other side of this passage, he didn't emerge with final answers, but with a renewed perception, one that recognized reality as a living metaphor. In essence, Jung had undergone a full spiritual initiation, and the Red Book became the record of that sacred process. He never released it during his lifetime. For many years, the manuscript remained locked away by his family. Nearly 200 pages written on thick parchment, adorned with meticulous handwriting and haunting, symbolic artwork. Jung himself admitted the work wasn't meant for the general public. He understood it didn't present a conventional psychological analysis, but rather a revelation of the soul, not in a dogmatic or religious way, but as a sacred unveiling, a glimpse into the hidden architecture of the psyche and the route toward inner wholeness. The structure of the book, with its vivid imagery and dense symbols, resembles a medieval grimoire more than a scientific treatise. This was intentional. Jung was deeply familiar with European alchemical traditions, esoteric teachings, and hermetic writings. He titled the book Liber Novus, Latin for the New Book, and built it with ritualistic design. The text is divided into three main sections: the way of what is to come, the soul, and the 7 sermons to the dead. Each division represents a phase in the soul's development, echoing spiritual frameworks from the Kabbalah, Orphic teachings, and Egyptian initiation rites. The illustrations include mandalas, symbols of the psyche's structure and the balance of the inner world. Within its pages, there are serpents and labyrinths, deities and eyes, solar symbols and winged beings, imagery drawn from the shared mythic language of humankind. Jung referred to these as archetypes, the ancient symbolic patterns that live within the collective mind of every culture and every era. Often, his writing in the Red Book resembles that of a prophet. At other times, he speaks like a seeker of alchemical truths. He addresses the soul as if it were a tangible presence, not a poetic concept. His words are weighty and intense, which may explain why the book strikes so deeply for those who approach it without scholarly filters. This is not a text meant for intellectual dissection. It is meant to be experienced. Jung himself declared, "This book freed me from all my neurosis. I wrote it with blood." After completing the Red Book, Jung spent the next several decades articulating the insights it gave him. His psychological theories, the ideas of archetypes, individuation, the collective unconscious, and the transcendent function all emerged from the visionary soil of this inner journey. But when he needed a language to express those profound experiences, he turned to the language of alchemy. Jung immersed himself in the study of medieval and Renaissance alchemical writings. He explored texts like the Rosarium Philosophorum, Aurora Consurgens, and the teachings of Paracelsus and Zosimos of Panopolis. He examined them not only as a psychologist, but as someone who had walked a similar path. He realized that alchemy wasn't early chemistry, it was a spiritual science, encoded in metaphor. The alchemists weren't merely trying to transform base metals into gold. Jung translated their arcane language into psychological terms, constructing one of the most profound bridges ever formed between science and the mystical. Alchemy is the historical basis of my psychology, he stated. One of the most mysterious segments of the Red Book is the 7 Sermons to the Dead, written in 1916 and attributed not to Jung, but to Basilides, a Gnostic sage of the 2nd century. In this enigmatic section, a voice speaks of the pleroma, the fullness of divinity, and of Abraxas, the god who unites opposites, good and evil, light and dark. The sermons defy logical interpretation. They are steeped in symbols, blending Gnostic myth, moral paradoxes, and metaphysical depths. It feels less like Jung is speaking and more like something speaking through it. This part of the book calls back to ancient oracles, sacred utterances, and revelations that bypass reason altogether. It is here that the Red Book fully declares itself as a text of initiation. For nearly 8 decades, it remained hidden. Only in 2009 did Jung's heirs allow it to be fully published for the first time. Since then, it has drawn the attention not just of psychologists, but of mystics, artists, philosophers, theologians, and seekers across the globe. It has been likened to the Divine Comedy, the Zohar, the Bhagavad Gita, and Plato's dialogues. Yet unlike those classics, the Red Book is deeply intimate. It makes no claim to instruct. It offers no systematic teaching. Instead, it is an unfiltered portrayal of the journey toward inner completeness. Perhaps its most precious gift lies here, demonstrating that one can confront the unconscious and survive. That there is a hidden structure even in descent. That even in darkness, one can find a path. For those who now turn to the Red Book, its power isn't in its scholarship. It's in the reflection it stirs. It awakens something. It strikes a chord. To read the Red Book is, for many, to face their innermost depths. It reawakens a voice long buried, not absent, just ignored. It reminds us that inside, there lies a wilderness, a sacred chamber, a storm, and a divine presence. And as Jung affirmed, the soul is real, and it seeks something from you. If the Red Book can be called a gospel, it is not one that guarantees redemption. Instead, it offers a path, a quest. And if you, like Jung, are willing to step into the unknown without guidance, to embrace the shadows, then perhaps you too will uncover your own fill-in, your own essence, your truest face. If you follow this journey to its end, then maybe you already sense it. The Red Book isn't solely Jung's story. It's yours as well. It speaks to all of us, to that undefinable presence we call the soul, the one that whispers within us, even when the world demands silence. This video isn't here to explain everything. It exists as a doorway, and the invitation it offers is simple. Close your eyes. Listen. If this journey stirred something within you, help us share it. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter into the depths of the soul. And let us know in the comments, what did the Red Book awaken in you? Thank you for being here.